we as an industry have wanted to have talked about how imperative financial education is to us. And it's what we are committed to and drive toward, and yet look at the trajectory of people's confidence in their level of financial knowledge. It hasn't moved a whole lot. So, and that isn't to say that they don't want to learn more. They do, but the methods we've tried haven't worked. So we need to stop putting out blog posts that nobody looks at.
The Digital Banking Podcast is powered by Typhon. Typhon is the creator of Infinia, a dramatically better digital banking platform for community financial institutions, as well as several platform-agnostic, revenue-generating point solutions. Our highly configurable platform and broad ecosystem of third-party partners ensure our entire suite is scalable and extensible to meet the needs of any FI. On our podcast, you will hear host Josh DeTar discuss today's most pressing financial technology topics with seasoned industry experts from every possible discipline.
You know, your podcast hasn't officially made it until there's ads in it. But this is one you're not going to want to skip past. And, well, if you do, feel free to hit that fast forward 15 seconds button twice. Ever wonder what gives me my energy and enthusiasm during these podcasts? You know, outside of my relentless desire to learn about, connect, share, and build up community FIs and their mission to support the communities they serve? It's coffee, and lots of it. Now, you want to know what's better than your regular old coffee? How about donating $5 to the Children's Miracle Network hospitals through Credit Unions for Kids every time you purchase high-quality, ethically sourced coffee that also provides living wages to coffee farmers? So if you want to listen to this episode with epic levels of caffeine-induced focus and help kids in need, head to javaforkids.org to learn more and buy a bag or 10. Thanks.
Welcome to another episode of the Digital Banking Podcast. My guest today is Zach Eychaner, VP of Digital Experience for ELGA Credit Union. You know, when I started this podcast, I don't think I actually had a conscious thought about how important it would become for me to highlight amazing people and the incredible impacts they have. But today, it's foundational to this show. My goal is to shine a spotlight on people that, in my humble opinion, are changing the world. Now, that doesn't always have to look like ending world hunger, although that would be amazing. Sometimes it looks like the little impacts people are making that will ripple into something bigger. When Zach and I were getting ready to start recording today, he told me what inspires him about the credit union industry is the notion that, oh, you can do banking and still have a soul. You see, that comment comes from an early job as a teller with a bank that was ultimately acquired by one of the big four. He said when he really looked at it, his job was to bend over backwards for the people who have everything and do as little as possible for the people who needed it more than anyone. Zach said, and I quote, "It ripped my soul." Many winding paths and life experiences have shaped Zach to be someone with deep, genuine empathy for other humans trying to live happy and fulfilling lives. It shapes almost everything he does. From the relationship he has with his two sons to the relentless passion he has for empowering the democratization of financial freedom credit unions can help provide to their communities. One thing you won't find with Zach is a bunch of fluff and stuff. You get what you get, he says what he means. He believes in his soul that credit unions have a tremendous opportunity ahead of them, but without some course corrections and without the right plans in place, they face a very real possibility of losing relevance as the world moves digital. Although digital is nothing without the people. We have lots to unpack in this episode today, including we will probably try and see how we can weave his love for nerddom and science fantasy into how credit unions can leverage tech and the future to change people's lives for the better. You know, if we do this right, the future is bright. If we do this wrong, it will only be bright for some. And I think that's a really powerful statement. And it's one of the reasons why I am so genuinely excited to have you on as a guest on the podcast today, Zach. You know, I said in my opening, like, it's really become important to me to shine a light on really special people. And don't take this the wrong way, but I think you're one of those people. I can just hear the passion and excitement in your voice. So I'm excited to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me.
It's great to be here. Excited to be on the show with you, John. I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
Yeah, thanks. You know, I always get super excited to have, folks like yourself on the podcast from credit unions, because I think what's always interesting to me is to see the unique ways that each credit union is kind of approaching what I see as a really pivotal time in our industry, right? Like, we are deep in the thick of, this kind of generational shift into technology and our leveraging of digital services. And we're taking what traditionally was a very, relational brick and mortar type of, interaction between a business and customer, i.e. a credit union and a member, and then trying to bring that into the digital world. And I always get really excited when I talk to folks like you that I think have very unique perspectives on like what that can look like today, but also like what is if there's no guardrails on it, like what can the future look like? So as you think about kind of the opportunity, as you stated, of like what credit unions can do for their members, but the challenges associated with kind of this new game that we're having to play, or this new arena we're having to play in, like what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think the opportunity is outstanding. I think digital allows credit unions to do what we've wanted to do for a long time, which is really have those one-on-one conversations, right? Really sit down with the member and go through a credit report and look at their budget and have those conversations. But when you get to a certain size and you continue to scale, it gets harder to do that. We have 100,000 members, and if we were to sit down with every single one of them, we'd have to hire a lot of people to kind of make that happen, right? And so with the advancements in technology, the advancements in different tech companies out there that are getting hyper-focused on serving those needs and addressing those needs, there's a lot of opportunity to really level the playing field for people and allow people who might not have access otherwise to a lot of really good, really relevant information that can help make a difference in their life and really empower them to do the things that they want to do and when they might not know how to otherwise. And so that's the the huge upside, is being able to just get in front of people with what's relevant and information that we can serve to them that helps them on that journey that they're on, wherever they're at in their life. Because what we do at credit unions, what you do at banks, anything else, so you're providing the mechanism through which people can do the things they want to do, right? The jobs they want to pursue, the lives they want to live, the children they have, the homes they live in, the cars they drive, all that stuff, the backbone of a lot of that is how are you paying for those things? How are you managing your life through that, right? And so there's just so many great tools that are coming. But with that, there's also people who are out there who are developing tech who want to scale it and make as much money as possible, sell off to a big company or whatever else. And so at that point, the sales pitches can become very, you need to do this and you should be doing X, Y, or Z. And it's really easy to get caught up in what can be seen as a shiny object or something that's not necessarily supporting your actual strategy, your actual mission. And you start doing digital instead of really trying to execute on a strategy, because there's so much going on that you can just do digital forever. And then there's the whole Black Mirror side of it, right? Of, if everybody has access and there's people who can't get access, then all of a sudden that could become, the dark side of things where you start to have like really hard caste systems of people who, have everything, have access to all the information, and those people who are still kind of boxed out. So I love Coordinated Credit Union because we want to provide this technology, we want to do the things that we can, and we want to do it at low to no cost if possible.
I've kind of given our listeners some insight in previous episodes of just kind of how my process works to get set up with a guest. But, one of the things that I do is I always send each guest kind of this intake form. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about the topics that you would like to discuss on the podcast. And, this is perfect case in point. Like, one of the reasons why I was so excited, one of the first times I met Zach, I was like, I've got to have you on the podcast. And he lived up to it in putting this in his intake form is, this word, one word in specific that you use, Zach, really caught my attention. And it's a word that, quite frankly, hasn't been super prevalent in my own vocabulary until recently. And then when you used it, it really piqued my interest. And it was the word is democratization, right? And when you and I were talking and just prepping for the podcast, you told me that what was so incredibly important to you was to really level the playing field, right? And to make sure that people have access, people, not some people, like just people, blanket statement. you are a person, you got a heartbeat, you got breath, like you are a people, you deserve to have access to the same great tools and financial abilities, right, that anyone else should have. And I think that's a really noble statement. But at the same time, what I think is really cool is seeing how you've kind of looked at, well, okay, that's all well and good, but like, how do you actually live up to that? Like, you can make the statement all you want. We can put that up as one of our strategic objectives in our boardroom at the credit union, but like, what are you actually doing to live up to that? And at the same time, I'd like you to kind of think through this as you respond is, you alluded to the fact of even just doing that at scale, right? And talking about how we're starting to see, a consolidation of credit unions. I mean, we're even starting to see fairly large credit unions merge into other fairly large credit unions, but even more significant on a smaller scale. But so as we start to lose some of those 2,000 and 3,000 member credit unions that really are like very entrenched in their community, that are talking to their members every single week, 1-to-1 in branch, how do you, one, make sure they stay relevant? Because I think you and I will both argue on the same side of the fence here that we cannot lose them, right? But at the same time, it is very important for larger credit unions like yourself to grow and to scale, because then you can continue to leverage, the pool of resources to do this stuff at scale better. So now we're talking about, how do we keep scale out of the equation using these tools? And then how do we take what makes that small example relevant and scale it? So as you look at those things in your credit union, like when you guys all sit around the table and talk, how are you thinking about, this idea of, your place as a credit union, given your size and your scale and your reach, and how do you use technology to scale kind of that democratization of financial services for your members?
Yeah, and it's tough, just like you said, right? Because you're a smaller credit union, you're usually going to be much more hyper-focused into one certain group of people, right, who have similar needs, and you're still addressing, that group. And as you get larger, and you've started to expand into having groups of people with different needs all over the place, right? And so it becomes really important to leverage the ability to personalize the information you're providing to the people so that what you're giving to people is relevant, right? Just throwing out a banner ad to everybody at this point is it's not relevant, it's not useful, it's confusing, because it's only going to be relevant to a handful of people. And so you've got to really figure out the best way to not lose sight of what your overall mission is, right? And it can't be so diluted that everything falls under that, right? If it's going to improve people's lives, cool, I can do that a lot of different ways, right? Like I could burn your house down and now you'll be happier because you don't have a mortgage payment, but that's probably extreme, and that's probably not. So you got to be careful, right? That you don't lose sight of what your real mission, your real purpose is, and then make sure that the things that you're doing, because it could be something that sounds cool or is helpful to some people, but isn't driving forward the actual strategy and the actual mission that the credit union should be having. And so that's a hard thing to define, to share out, possibly, because of the fact that there's so many different ways to support and to help with what you're doing. As a CDFI, we serve low-income folks, and we make loans to people that, a lot of credit unions don't even do. We do that, and because we're a credit union, we're a pretty simple balance sheet kind of driven, right? We need deposits to make loans. And so when you're serving people who don't have a lot of income, they don't have a lot of deposits. And so now you've got to figure out, how do you flex your strategy then to say we need to attract more deposits for people, but we don't want their loans. So we can take those deposits and give them out in loans to other people. And so now how can we create a digital environment where that becomes easier for people, it becomes attractive to people to kind of bring their deposits over, so that you can then make loans to people where they need it, when they need it. And if we try to get staff for that and have somebody available 24/7, 365, because that's what we would need to do, you just can't do it. So now we've got to also find a way to actually have a mechanism in place to get those loans to people when they need them, where they need them, how they need them. And to the point even that we have a mobile branch now that we're rolling out, and we'll be launching very soon, to get into communities where people possibly don't have cars, they don't have access, they don't have those things. Like, that is a thing that feels less like digital, obviously, right? Because we're getting people on the street and putting them out there. But then part of that is going to be also showing people how they can have access using a phone, using a computer, using something else they may have access to handle these things when we're not there, right? And so I think how credit unions also, if we stay on brand, we stay on mission, ways we can support those smaller credit unions too is through QSOs and through coming together. There's that ongoing collaboration to say, hey, we get 3,000 member credit unions to come together. They can pool resources and they can do more than they can do by themselves, right? And so it's recognizing the value that they're bringing to the group that they're serving, and how can we as a larger credit union be a part of that and say, hey, we can give you, expertise, we can give you some knowledge, some guidance, some, processes that work, things that are troubling, and work through that so that we can support you in serving the people that you're serving, because we know you're doing great work. And at the same time, we're going to then take our scale and the resources that we have that are more than a 2,000 person credit union and less than a 500,000 person credit union, but we can, through the appropriate partnerships with the right companies, we can really make things relevant and different, and make sure that we don't lose sight of all those different pockets of people who need stuff from us and have special needs and have that. And what's been great about, what I love about digital is that the data is there. You just got to look at it, right? We can sit around, and planning from a strategy standpoint 15 years ago was a survey with a 15% response rate if you're lucky, and you're using that to inform the entire, next year, 3 years, 5 years. Now we know what people are looking at. We know what they care about. We know what they don't care about. And so taking that information, we get 100% data. We get all of that back and then say, this is what's really relevant and this is what's not relevant. And so let's now kind of keep honing that message and honing those tools that are serving the things that people really want.
You talked about doing digital versus having a digital strategy. I think you're kind of alluding to that in your last. So expand on that for me. Like, what does that mean to you?
It's one of my fears, I think, for credit unions as a whole, but, community banks and heck, anybody can do it, right? Doing digital is partnering for press releases or feeling like credit unions. It's the same problem that I had when I was leading contact centers and saying, like, you can push products at a credit union and still feel good about yourself at the end of the day because we don't have bad products, right? You could do digital and feel like you are helping people by doing the right thing and through giving them tools that they would have had otherwise. But the question is, was that what they really needed? Because there's an opportunity cost, right? For every partnership that you make, there's one that you don't. And if you're doing digital, you're partnering, you're not looking at the big picture, right? If you had defined what that strategy looks like and what your end goal is, what the end game is, and what a digital credit union looks like to you, then you start that next big pitch, or when the CEO comes back from a conference where somebody was talking about X, Y, or Z, and or the whole topic was about generative AI and how many different ways are we using it, right? Like, then that drives the narrative versus bringing it back to the strategy, right? If you lose, if you haven't defined where you're going, you can keep moving forward, but it's going to be really erratic, and at the end of the day, it's going to create a really weird experience, and one that could be disjointed. You could be doing something state of the art in one really weird use case or kind of, business case, whatever, and have standard things we use all the time feel really, really old and antiquated and like they don't make sense, right? And so you start to set weird expectations too that can't be delivered on, and it can feel really, really disjointed. And I think that's the part where, as we start spending more money on technology and increasing those budgets and doing more, that if we're not putting it in a way that's driving our strategy forward and focused on where we want to be at the end, we're going to spend an awful lot of money to find out that we didn't get the return that we wanted, we didn't become the institution we wanted to be, and then it might be too late.
I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about the credit union industry in specific, right? Is when you talk about money, because in all reality, everything that you do, Zach, is spending your members' money, right? And whether they realize it or not, they are doing business with you and they are giving you money that is ultimately their money. And then they're putting their faith and their trust in you expecting that what you are going to do with that money is find a way to return tangible value to them. And that's a really big challenge. And I think especially when, like you were saying, a lot of times we identify how am I going to return value to you is we used to send out a survey and we'd get a small, percentage of our membership respond. And then, you're implementing things. And if you implement something that returns value to 4% of your membership, but it makes up 50% of your budget, like, well, you friend have a problem. And so, how are you looking at that? I think that creates an interesting, kind of space for you to play in, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it's why making sure that you have a data strategy with your digital strategy so that you can really measure what you're doing and make sure that the things you intended to do, you're doing. And if you're not, don't throw good money after bad, right? You have a sunk cost, accept it, and know when it's time to cut and do something different, right? And historically, the credit unions that I've worked with, talked with, I've been around, really good at looking forward, rarely looking back. And while that sounds cool, you may have a ton of products that you don't need anymore. You may have processes you don't need anymore. You have a lot of things that you're doing that make no sense, or things that you rolled out that you got through that you always meant to go back and look at and that you're not doing. And then it's always taking that data, looking back and making sure that, again, the things that you're doing, that you're rolling out, you had a desired end state. Did you achieve that? And if you didn't, no harm to that. You've got to try something, right? Doing something is better than doing nothing. But you should be measuring, you should be looking back, and then you should be pivoting if you need to. Or you can put more into something. It's like, wow, that's really returning. Like, we need to just lean in even heavier there because that resonated at a level we didn't even know or didn't anticipate. And now we need to just really, that was the thing. Let's really lean into that piece.
That resonates really well with me as a marketer, right? Because, for us, sometimes it's really hard to admit that, we came up with this really cool campaign and then the world thinks it's really stupid. And you're like, oh, you know what? I already dumped a ton of money into this sucker. We're just going to run this thing into the ground. I don't want anyone to ever hear from me that it wasn't successful. But a lot of times you got to take your ego out of it. You got to be like, hey, that thing that we said was going to be awesome and we put a bunch of money in. Yeah, it stinks. It's no good. We got to abort mission. We got to about face. We got to try something different. And to your point, that is really hard on both the emotional level, but it's also hard on the KPI level, right? It's really hard to say, I dumped $100,000 into this project and I said that I was going to see, a 2x ROI on it. And actually it's negative. We got nothing out of this. And that's really hard. And sometimes it's even easier to try and save face and say, well, we'll double down. We'll keep going into this. And then that's when we'll see the reward out of this. And I know that's a little bit of an extreme example, but even as you are a credit union looking at your digital strategy or some of the products and services that you offer, this is an evolving world. Things don't stay still. They don't stay stagnant. And so if you look back on and say, we're the exact same credit union, that we were in the 1950s, that's a problem. Now, I'd argue that you have to be the same at your core, at your soul, at your value proposition, but what you look like and how you actually, demonstrate that and bring that value out probably should look very, very different. And sometimes that's hard for us to admit.
Yeah, I mean, the world's not the same as it was 70 years ago, right? And so if you're trying to be who you were then and offer the same products you were then, you haven't grown with where the world has grown to, right? It's that start where the people are and then help move them forward, right? But you can't start where they were because that's not a great place to be. No, and it just, I can tell you that there have been digital features that I thought were just going to be so cool. They sounded great. They made people's lives so much easier. And I threw them out there and they were out and we had a hard time getting data on them, but it was okay because, it was it was cool. It was different. It was really helpful. And then find out that the service was unavailable, didn't work for 2 months and not one person said a word. And I'm like, okay, well, what I've learned now is, A, that didn't matter, but that stuff is okay if you're learning from it, right? And that's what I've been talking with the team about here at times too, is we're going to try something and it might sound ridiculous and it may fail colossally, but we're going to come out of it smarter than we started because now we're going to have another data point. We're going to know what didn't work. And that's going to help us be smarter for the next thing we execute and something that's near that we execute. We're going to, it's going to help us understand the things that work, the things that resonate, and the things that don't. And knowing what not to do is every bit as valuable as knowing what to do, right? Because it really does help shape that, and it means less mistakes going forward. If you cover those things up, then you can't learn from the failures, right? You're like, hey, we did this before. Was it successful? I don't know. Then do we try it again? And we probably do, because now that becomes a thing we do every year. Every year we do X, Y, or Z, right? We do skip a pace. We do small dollar loans. Did they resonate? Did they perform? Did they make a difference? Or are we just going through the motions now because that's what we did? And it's so easy to keep looking forward and look at what's next and not take that time to assess what's going on, right? That's that whole digital transformation piece. Standard rules on the RPA side before you automate something. Should you even be doing it anymore?
Yeah.
Right? Like, you've got to be willing to learn, and you've got to be willing to fail. And I think that starts at the top, right? Because worked at a great organization that said all the time, we want you to try things and it's okay if you fail. And we want you to try things. It's okay if you fail. And then the executive team would have colossal failures and they wouldn't share them. They were embarrassed by them. So you can say that all day long, but when the team only sees you sharing successes, then they feel like, yeah, but everything you guys try works, right? So like, I don't want to try so because I'd be the first one to fail. And then are you going to look at me poorly because all your stuff is succeeding? And so it's like, you've got to be transparent on that. You've got to share those things that you failed on, where you're trying, and what you've learned from it. And if you can create that culture, I think that you can definitely start finding the best ways to serve the people who you're trying to serve and make the difference you're trying to make.
Isn't it funny how easy it is to say a lot of the things? And I think most of us humans are well-meaning, right? Like there's some pretty bad actors out there, don't get me wrong. But for the most part, we're all pretty good people. And I don't think we go into things intentionally trying to be malicious. But a lot of times we do. We make statements and then we don't actually follow through them with our actions. And that's a really hard thing to do when you're the one that has the target on their back. But when you can do that, it creates a really special culture. But I think you really nailed it, at least in my opinion. Transparency is a big part of that, right? One of the things I like to preach all the time to my team is that if the answer to the question is, when I say, why are we doing this way? If the answer is, well, that's how we've always done it, that should be an immediate red flag. And we should say, okay, so is that still the right way to do it? And sometimes, Zach, I don't follow my own advice, right? Because sometimes you're just in the moment of it, and you're like just so entrenched in the process of it. Like, this is how I've always done it. This is how I've always done it. Then somebody calls out and like, hey dude, just throwing it out there. Like, that's probably not the best way to do that. And you're like, oh crap. Yeah, you're totally right. Like, but then having that transparency to say, you know what, you're right. And actually, like, I led us down a wrong path for a while because of that. And I'm going to make that right. And I'm going to fix that. And, kind of showing some vulnerability. But I'd love to get your perspective on this, because I've brought this conversation up a few times on the podcast with guests. But I think where, again, we're talking about like, this all sounds well and good. This is all great. But you're also in a very heavily regulated industry, right? And there's got to be some guardrails around. Like, failure is fine. Unless what happens is Monday morning, all of your members realize that the credit union is dissolved and they've squandered all the money and there is none left, and you're going to get just what is insured. And then best of luck finding a new institution. Like, that's kind of a problem. I think we could agree to that. So like, there's got to be some guardrails around failures. But at the same time, like, if that is always your driving force, and so when the conversation comes up, like, hey, why are we doing it this way? You're like, well, it's because this is how we've always done it. And we know it works. We know I won't get fired for this. And we know we won't lose all of our members' money. Like, that absolutely has to go into that conversation for you guys, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that it's the mindset shift, and you can talk in extremes and get really kind of fun with it, because of the fact that at the end of the day, we're a financial institution that's going to, who is extremely well regulated, internal audits and external audits, exams, and all these things going on all the time to make sure that, our books are good and we're good stewards of all the money that we have, right? All of that starts there, right? And so you have that, but the challenge that I see is even in taking risks that don't cost money and won't get you out of business are still things that we're afraid to try. And I think that some of it is because even if, as an executive or somebody in upper management, you tell your team like, hey, I want you to try this. And if it fails, that's fine. And then you let them go. If they're not comfortable in that, they're going to probably still not do that, even though they were given permission. And so you almost have to go in there and be like, let's sit down, let's talk about how you're going to do one of those things, right? Let's try messaging that's different. Let's, do those things and then budget for not R&D, but I love A/B testing, right? As soon as I learned about it, that was the coolest thing ever. Like, hey, this is great. Why not try 2 or 3 ideas at once instead of just one and see which one really actually kind of makes a difference? And playing in those spaces even isn't necessarily a competency that a lot of credit unions are comfortable with, right? Let's try different things with the same group of people because one way should work. And that's how we do this. When we talk to people who have a lot of money, we talk at this level. And when we talk to people who maybe need some money, we talk about, payment instead of rate, and we just whatever that might be. But, it's the same reason I get frustrated when people talk about how you target and talk to Gen Z, and to just take an entire generation of people and say that they all want to hear things the same way is frustrating to me because, like, I have a 20-year-old son, and he should, by everything I've ever read, hate cash with a passion. And he is concerned whenever he talks about his bank account. And I've moved credit unions a little bit here and there over the last few years. He's like, should I come too? And I'm like, you do whatever you want to do. If what's working for you works, that's great. And he's like, well, if I go to your credit union, do I have an ATM? And the kid's always got a pocket full of cash on top of the other things he's doing too. And so, like, where an ATM is drives where he picks his account. And in his generation, that shouldn't matter because brick and mortar doesn't matter anymore because the bank branch is dead. All of that stuff, how we talk to people, how we communicate, how we serve the people and help them understand, what the guidance is and how we're there to help them, that should be something that we're tinkering with and we're changing and we're looking at, the nuances that exist and kind of recognizing that and then understanding that we're not going to have the answers. Like, one of my favorite things to tell people all the time is like, I have no idea, but I know we can find out. Like, I don't ever try to pretend I know everything because I don't. And I like to lead with that, like, no idea. But I know some pretty smart people. You ask some questions, we're going to figure some of this out. We can kind of pin this down, right? That stuff is that, it goes back to that kind of leading by example. Like, be vulnerable first. And you'll create a space where people will be vulnerable as well. And they'll start to kind of open up and throw an idea like, well, here's a thought. Maybe we could try this. Like, let's do that. And if it's not going to cost you $100,000 and shut down 3 branches, give it a shot, because what's the worst that happens? It doesn't work, and you get to learn and you get to have that faith and trust in somebody and build up their confidence to try something else next time, right? But I just think there's a lot of opportunity there, and we just miss it. And I'll say, not knowing a lot of stuff has been awesome for me too, because it's that part where, like, I don't get ingrained in my ways because I don't know what a lot of people are doing in a lot of spaces. And so I can go to a department and be like, walk me through what you're doing right now. Okay, well, okay, hold on. What was that you just did? And why did you do that? And, like, I don't know. I'm genuinely curious. And I hear someone go like, well, do you have to do that? And then you see them pause. I'm like, I don't know. I was told I have to, but, like, just, like, have those conversations too. And I think that, like, creating a structure around that would probably be a great idea, to say, like, go tour and shadow a group you know nothing about, because you could identify those things a lot more, because you're not filling in the gaps automatically, like, oh, you do that because of that thing that, we have to do that. We have to, like, that, like, if you can't fill those gaps in, then you have to have that explained, and all of a sudden it slows that process down to really assess what's happening.
You just made me think of, I heard this old wives' tale long ago, and it just brought it back to memory. The story goes, so this mom is making the Thanksgiving turkey, and it's like her first year hosting at her house, doing the Thanksgiving turkey. And, she's a young mom herself, and her young daughter comes up and is helping her, and she's getting ready to put the turkey in the oven, and she chops the top of the turkey off. And the daughter goes, well, why do you do that? She's like, well, because my mom, grandma, always did that. And so the little girl goes out and asks grandma. She goes, Grandma, Mom said she cuts the top of the turkey off because you did. Like, why did you chop the top of the turkey off? She goes, well, I did that because my mom, your great grandma, who's sitting over there, in the rocker, she used to do that. So the little girl's puzzled and she walks over to great grandma. And she says, great grandma, Mom says, she chops the top of the turkey off because, her mom did. And she says, because you did. Why do you chop the top of the turkey off? She goes, oh, honey, it's because back in the day, we used to get a turkey that was too big to fit in our oven, and I had to chop the top off so it'd fit. Right?
Yep.
I think that's such a great story for exactly what we were talking about. Right? Like so many times we just kind of keep following through the process, and you're like, well, do you need to chop the top of the turkey off, or can you save that? You got an extra, pound of meat to feed the family. But it's just, if we get so entrenched in the process, and sometimes we almost make sacred cows out of these types of things. And we're like, well, you can't touch that. Like you have to chop the top of the turkey off because that's what Mom did and that's what Grandma did. You're like, actually, you don't have to. It dries the bird out. It makes it kind of taste crummy. You can actually just keep the top of the bird on. I don't know. It was funny. It made me think of that. I hadn't recalled that in some time.
Yeah. One of the questions that I was asked, and I would see asked a lot by a former CEO that I've taken with me, and I've watched people around the credit union here start to use it more, and then come back to it. I love that. I was like, I know, right? It can be infuriating at times when somebody asks you the question, or it can be like, it's ridiculous. But the question was pretty simple, like, but what if we didn't? Right? So we do this and this. Cool. What if we didn't do that? And it was even like, what if we didn't process card disputes? We just didn't. We just gave all the money back. We said, yeah, forget it. And it was like, well, it cost you this much money. I'm like, well, we can't do that then. That's crazy. We're going to business, right? We got to process these things. But like anything that's being done anywhere, what if we didn't do it, right? Are we going to go to jail? Are we going to lose our jobs? Are we going to, shut down, lose all of our money? Or is it like, it wouldn't do anything, actually. It would make things easier for everybody. Like, oh, cool. Well, then maybe let's stop, right? And so that's one of my favorite things to just kind of, pull out every once in a while, like when I'm looking at something and go through it for my own, or here at, credit union, I've been at now for 6 months, where I can look at kind of how things are going and go, what if we didn't do that thing? Like, and a lot of it sounds like, is driven by, it made sense at the time 20 years ago, and it has been a set it and forget it. And, that's the end. And just the efficiencies that come out of that. And again, all of those things are important because all the extra steps you do, all the extra things that you're doing, when you then try to digitize, becomes hard, right? That's all friction that you've got to figure out how to translate later. And so the easier you can make a process at any given point, the easier it's going to be to actually digitize that and create a positive experience. And that's why those things are so important to just start to figure out, because everything's interconnected now, right? And when we want to throw out a great digital experience, we want it to work really well. The partners people have already partnered with, the processes that they do, the risk they take or they don't, all of those things impact the end result of what you can deliver, right? And so we get going back to kind of that's why people become so important in the digital process, right? Yeah. And what the digital experience can be, because if we're stuck in legacy thinking and legacy processes, and then we want to modernize those processes, like we're doing the wrong thing, right? Like that's not how you're going to be successful.
When you were talking earlier too, you're talking about how just, sometimes you can buy the best tech or something in the world, but it's ultimately the human. Like that is the most important key to this whole thing, is the people that are a part of that process. You go out and you buy a Ferrari, and then you say, okay, but we're going to take the engine and we're going to restrict 200 horsepower out of it. And we're going to take, all the downforce aids off of it, and we're going to put cheap tires on it. And, well, now you don't have a Ferrari. Like, you can't go out to the racetrack and race anymore. Like, you don't have a race car anymore, but you bought a race car. And I think that goes back to what you were talking about. It's really important to not just do digital. It's important to have a strategy. Like, if you're always a hammer looking for a nail versus identifying what nails do you have and then what hammers do you need that are going to be the appropriate hammers for those nails, and really aligning that to the strategy, both short-term and long-term, is what will make sure that you kind of align those more equally. Is that fair? Where you're like, well, we bought a Ferrari and we're using a Ferrari. And here we really needed a Honda and we bought a Honda, right? And not vice versa. And at the same time, like the way you're actually implementing it is in a way to kind of maximize, what you have in theory aligned to and picked to be able to meet those objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I've enjoyed about, working at this credit union as we start to modernize is that there is a lot of legacy technology. And what's good about that is that you can spend the time that you need to identify all of those points that don't need to be there anymore, the things that will create friction as you go forward. And you can maximize, your processes, you can maximize the technology that you have, and then learn what the limitations are. And then you can list and tell everybody, like, well, we can't do this or this. Like, cool. Did you write that down somewhere? You should be keeping a list, because at some point you're going to look back and say, should we keep this partner or not? And when you have a list of all the things you couldn't do, like it's a great spot to have a conversation with them to make sure that they really can't do it, and to, now what you're looking for when you find a new partner, right? But just at some point, you need to identify what is you and what's the technology, right? What's the credit union? What have they built in processes and everything else that's creating that poor experience? And what is just a straight limitation of the technology that you have in place? And if you don't get the first part right, the part that's you, if you can't clean that part up, then bringing in a partner who's telling you all the great things they can do for you and that you can do with them, when you find out how it all comes together and how your processes exist and everything else, like you can just very easily make the best technology, or that Ferrari, right? Drive like a Honda real quick. You can do that if you don't look at the self-limiting processes, procedures, friction, risk aversion, the whatever it might be, right? What are those things holding you back? And then how do you get everybody on the same page? Because if you have a person responsible for digital, and that's who drives digital, and that's it's their job to do digital, I'm over here doing collections or whatever, right? Like if I'm only in my space and I don't understand how all these things I do are impacting the other side, then it's always going to be a less than ideal experience, which means that the opportunities that you have to really level the playing field and make things work, because I can tell you can do this yourself online, but if I've made that experience cumbersome and full of friction and confusing, then I haven't really given you an attractive option, and therefore you don't have the option, right?
I think that's one of the reasons why I really like having conversations about digital with you is, don't get mad at me for saying this, hopefully. You're not a technologist, right? Like that's not your background. And one thing that you said to me really kind of stuck with me. You said a lot of where you draw your inspiration from is from your days in the call center, right? And I love that, because that's where you really and truly, like going back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like your job as an executive at the credit union overseeing digital, your job, like your stated mission is to find ways to deliver value to your members through the money that they are giving you, trustee, over through digital services, right? So how do you know what's actually going to provide value to them? Well, talking to them, like being a part of their conversations, understanding, hey, when somebody's calling into our call center or when somebody's stopping into our branch, like what are the ways that we're supporting them? And then like you were saying, like, how do we identify, one, is that even the right thing? Are we doing it in the right way? Then, can it be digitized? Can the process be optimized? Now we have a problem. Now we can go look for a solution, right? And I just think that's a really, really astute perspective to add to when we're looking at digital banking. Yeah, you got to have the right technology, right? Like, again, if you need a Ferrari to accomplish the things and you get a Honda, like you're doomed from the start. Like you're never going to win the race, right? But at the same time, like you have to have the perspective of, well, we've got to be able to bring the right people in to vet to make sure that we've got the right technology for whatever it is, right? For a card solution, for a LOS, for, core, like whatever it may be. Like, let's identify, okay, can this technology actually support our strategic objectives? But then you have to be able to have the conversation of what are our strategic objectives? Like, how do we actually define success out of this thing so that the inverse doesn't happen and you don't end up with the Ferrari technology and you're using it like the Honda?
which is exactly why you should have already identified what those jobs to be done are, right? The credit union's reason for existing, right? We provide a service. That service is accounts, cards, whatever, right? Loans. That's what we do. The only reason we use technology is because technology makes our jobs easier and it makes it easier to deliver that service. So it doesn't matter, like, me being ignorant of some of the deep technical pieces of it serves me because I don't get lost in the weeds of how it's doing what it does, because that doesn't really matter as much as, yes, there has to be security. Yes, there has to be stability. Like, those things are table stakes, right? But once you get beyond that, does it allow people to do the things they need to do, the service we want to provide, and are they using it to do the thing? Because if either of those is no, then we have the wrong answer and we need to figure out what that is. And so it really comes back to, engagement, adoption, usage, and are you getting the results that you intended to get when you rolled the thing out? And if you're not, whether it be mobile banking and digital banking and a new app and texting with members and chat and whatever it is, right? Your core conversions are painful. Nobody likes to do them, right? Hopefully everybody gets on board doing like sidecar cores and that kind of stuff now, but identify the jobs to be done that you're trying to get hired for your organization. Like, what are those things? And let that define your strategy, and then where you're trying to go, and then you'll find the right partner. There's so many partners out there and people who are really good at doing a lot of things. And I'm sure that people on the tech side, who are selling to credit unions appreciate the heck out of it too. Like, coming to somebody who's like, here's my plan, here's my roadmap, this is where I'm trying to go. How can you help me do these things? Versus show me everything and I'll tell you if I like something or not, right? Like, that's got to be a harder place to have the conversation, right? Because it goes like, we need, what this credit union needs, or what we're committed to finding, right, is true partners, not just SaaS companies, right? I want a partner. Somebody's going to help me do the things I'm trying to accomplish and work with me alongside me to do that. And if one more vendor that I know just has customers starts trying to call me a partner again, I'm going to lose my mind and turn off my email. Because it's become such a buzzword and it just drives me nuts because of the fact that I know so many people don't live that. Like, I will always feel like a customer until you prove you're a partner of mine. So just so the world knows, we'll throw that out there. But
no, it is true. I mean, I think, again, we've kind of talked about it. Like, talk is cheap. Like, it's easy to say the thing. It's hard to do the thing. Kind of like what you were saying too. I think you made a really important point on just this. Let's talk about it. Let's be super transparent here, right? Like, we're talking about a vendor and a customer potential partnership, right? And as you're going into that for whatever it is, right? I mean, heck, if it's for, signage for your branch, whatever it may be, if you're evaluating a partnership, this is a two-way street. And I think a lot of times that does get lost. I'm just going to be totally honest. Like, I see that in some of the different conversations that at least even we have. And it's, just show me everything that you have. Well, you have to, my wife gives me a hard time for this, Zach. I don't know any other. I just use a lot of car analogies. So you can give me a hard time about it too. But like, there's a lot of companies that make good cars, right? You got Honda and Toyota and Mitsubishi and, Hyundai and whatever. So you've got all these different that make a reasonable car for a reasonable price. They all fit in a similar market segment, right? If I just go to all of them and I say, I would like a car, show me what you got, show me the best, I'm going to see a lot of different things from some of them. Like, somebody may come to me, and if I just get even the personalities of the salespeople at the dealerships, right? Like, I go to the Honda dealership and he's like, oh, we have this crazy, Civic race car one, and it's the coolest thing, and everybody wants one. And then, I go to Chrysler and they're like, hey, we have the best minivan on the planet. Oh, two totally different products for two totally different segments of the market, right? Whereas instead, if I go to them and I say, hey, I'm a single 21-year-old dude who really wants to impress my buddies with his fun, loud little car, and I have zero responsibilities, yeah, that little race car is going to sound great. But if I'm like, hey, man, I'm a 40-year-old dude with 2 kids and a family to cart around, I got soccer practice next week, that minivan's going to resonate really well for me. So that really helps to inform the conversation of, Okay, great. Okay, that's actually really helpful. Like, I understand what your strategic objectives are. And I think the credit unions are really similar in that regard, right? Like, there's a lot of things that you are identical to every other credit union in the country on, right? And even sometimes if you look at just our board strategic objectives as bullet points, a lot of times those are probably very similar across the entire industry. And it's very market dependent, right? If deposits are down, guess what's going to be on top of pretty much everybody's strategic objective? Got to increase deposits, right? So there's going to be some just like check mark the boxes stuff that we have to do. But it's how do you find those unique differentiators within your own organization and be really, really good about being able to articulate those, because that's really helpful in that process of being able to go and say, hey, now I'm not looking for cars. I need a minivan. And these are the things that are really important to me. Like, I got a 3-year-old that crushes Cheerios like it's going out of style. So if you have a built-in vacuum, let's talk, okay? Right? Like, having those kinds of conversations, like, great. Okay, you know what? Hey, I'm going to be totally honest, man. I don't have a built-in vacuum. So if that's a deal breaker for you, then I know Honda's does, whatever. Yeah, I'm just making this stuff up at this point. Right? Like, then that's a really great conversation. And that's being able to say, hey, you know what? Like, I'm not going to be able to identify or, align to your unique strategic objectives and your unique kind of goals and value prop to your members. And that can really help you to identify the right partners too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, again, I just keep beating the drum for, like, have a strategy, know where you want to go. I had the conversation here where we're looking at, a new LOS platform. I have zero say in where we go. And they were like, is X, Y, or Z a deal breaker? And I was like, well, what's your end vision for what that loan experience should look like? And what are the things that need to be part of that process for you to feel comfortable that you can do the thing you need to do as effectively and as efficiently as possible? And when you map that out and actually write it out, then you'll find out real quick what are the deal breakers and what are, like, that's a cool thing, but it's cool. I don't need it though, right? Where these other things are things I absolutely have to have, and just helping take that step back and just think, because, right, again, if we're doing digital, we're seeing everything and we're going to see something that looks super cool that might resonate, it might not, but does it support your goal and your plan for where you want to go? And if so, awesome. And if it doesn't, then just have that conversation, right? Like, hey, unfortunately, this is going to work for me, right? That's why I warned every vendor to, I always tell them I'm high maintenance and I care about everything. So if you can't baffle me with bullshit and then turn around and think that I'm going to just not ever talk to you about it again. I want monthly calls. We're going to get out there. We're going to see how we're doing. You better have my stats, because I will, and I'll be asking questions on how we, adjust these things. And, why are we getting adoption here? Is because of, cognitive load being too high with too many options. Let's play with that. Let's figure it out. And that comes because I have a pretty clear idea of where I want to go and what I want to be offering at the end of the day. And when I have that, it just makes this conversation so much more meaningful. I know for me, because at the end of the day, I have those calls, and it wasn't we've got a bunch of problems, but it's necessary evil, so we'll keep that under the rug, and we'll just talk about, the weekend, upcoming vacation, the next conference, and then we'll dip. We're like, that's great, but, like, are you getting what you needed to get? And if not, like, I don't know, it's probably easier to cover up what those mistakes were. Right? Yeah. Just like you said before, that, I don't want to say that I signed a contract for 3 years that's pretty expensive that was with the wrong partner or wrong vendor or wrong whatever, right? But, like, if you don't own that at some point, right, like, the results will be there.
Yeah, I know. That kind of goes back to what we were talking about, of just, it's really easy to say that. And I think a lot of times all of us are well-meaning in it, in that, like, we'll be transparent, but a lot of times when, like, the situation actually comes up, it's really hard to do that. You're like, man, I don't know what are people's perceptions of me going to be if I share this information? And so we all know how this works. Like, we all know how this works. Like, our moms taught us this when we were little kids, right? Like, you tell the lie and then you keep doubling down on it. It just compounds. By the time it comes out, it's a hell of a lot worse than if you had just owned up to it and been like, yeah, I threw that ball. I broke the glass. That's my bad, right? But still, even as adults, like how many times do we, even ourselves, I'm sure, Zach, like you and I probably were sitting here preaching it, but I'm sure we still do it. Like nobody's perfect, right? We're like, crap, like maybe if I just sweep that one under the rug for a little bit, maybe I'll figure out how to like solve for it before it gets out. And sometimes you're like, no, you know what, crap. We should have just like ripped that Band-Aid, should have just had that conversation. And it's really hard, even as grown adults, for us to be like, hey, Zach, I'm gonna call you up because we screwed up and I'm really sorry. Like that, nobody wants to make that phone call. That phone call is so hard to make, right? Mm-hmm. You know it's going to be better if you do it, but it's still really hard to make it.
What I can say is that one thing I don't expect from anybody I work with, right, is perfection.
Yeah.
And so I do watch, like, how do they react when something doesn't go the way they wanted it to, right? When they do make a mistake or somebody doesn't execute the way they should have. Like, their reaction, their response will tell you if you have the right partner or not, right? It's because the person's going to own that and tackle it and dig into it and be like, here's what happened, here's how it happened, here's what we addressed and found out about it, and here's how I'm making sure it doesn't happen again. That's the person I'll work with. The person who's spinning and kind of blowing smoke and all that. Like, I recognize that too, and we'll just keep that in mind when the time comes, right? Like, so yeah, I mean, but yes, I'm guilty of it. Absolutely. There's probably two things I want to think of as soon as we stop talking. I'm like, oh, I didn't follow up on that, did I? Or I didn't get that thing done, or I was kind of hiding that part. Let me go. Yeah, let's just tackle it because it's the right thing, and it's going to be a heck of a lot easier if I just do it now than keep avoiding, ignoring, or covering it up, right?
Yeah, but I think that's one of the other reasons why I really love this podcast, right? Is this is such a cool opportunity to have these kinds of conversations with people. Like, I don't know, even if you and I were to meet at a conference, right? Or absolutely, if we were to meet in some sort of like sales presentation modus, like we would never have this conversation. And I think the beauty of, humans and like just being on this planet is our ability to connect and collaborate. And there's, so much that can be gained by just talking to people. It's crazy. And you walk away from these conversations, and every single time, like I get done recording a podcast, I feel so fortunate. Like I feel very blessed to be able to do this as a part of my job, is to be able to just talk to people with no agenda, with literally no objective at the end of this thing, to just talk to people and get to hear their thoughts and get to share it with others. Because if I'm walking away with nuggets, then my hope is that other people walk away with nuggets. And I was having a conversation with our SVP of product recently, and like he and I had a conversation, something about parenting and just like living up to, I make my kid say sorry when he does something wrong, but like how good am I at when I do something wrong for him? Like when I say sorry, like how good am I at that? And, he and I were having this whole conversation, and literally both of us were like, I owe one of my kids an apology. And he was like, yep, me too. And I was like, yeah. Honestly, like I needed this conversation to remind myself of that. And literally last night, like I had to sit down with my son and I was like, hey buddy, I'm super sorry. Like daddy did this and I shouldn't have. And I need to apologize to you. And like, but again, like it's that collective power of having conversations with people that brings some of that stuff to the surface. And you just need to hear that at the right moment, at the right time, and delivered by the right person. And so the more you connect with people, the more opportunities you have for those things. And that's why I think it's cool to have, folks that are just super open and transparent on the podcast to come in and talk about, like, yeah, as we bring this all the way back to trying to think about how do you evaluate, technology to keep credit unions relevant. Like, I think the last hour articulates why people are such a big part of that equation, right?
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So I want to come back to something else that you said earlier when you talk about the people side of things. And one of the things you talked about was just, how like the collective collaboration of credit unions can be such a superpower. And just, being able to say, hey, we're going to take some learnings that we've brought at scale to a smaller credit union. And then we're going to actually take some things from a smaller credit union that's like, hey, that's great. You're doing that at scale with technology. But check this, conversation I just had with a legit member in our branch because they were physically there. And you're like, oh, wow, like that's super cool. Like, how could we be thinking about that? And then looking up to a credit union that's, 5 times your size and looking at what they're doing. So, but you had made a comment about wanting to just, I don't know if I can put this on you, but like your kind of aspirational goal is to help, the industry at large kind of have a blueprint for, how do we really kind of collaborate together to collectively uplift credit unions' ability to stay relevant as technology becomes kind of a quintessential pillar of that relevance.
Yeah, yeah. And when I look at it holistically, it's daunting, right? It's huge to say like, hey, what I want to do is help share a vision that is applicable across multiple credit unions and could be the key to the survival of the very industry. If you do, these things, it's a lot, right? And so I'm still in the kind of prove the theory camp, right? Like, okay, like before I can tell you what the best move is, what the best ideas are, like I need to execute these things and show that it works. And I feel like once that happens, because credit unions talk and we do collaborate, we're not afraid to, hop on a call with each other. And I was talking with some people from California just the other day about something, and they're creating out there where it was a reference call for a fintech, and it quickly turned into comparing notes on all kinds of stuff, right? And like we're not afraid to just have those conversations, right? As we do that and share those best practices and really, really normalize the importance of digital, not just as a separate function, like there's lending and there's branches and there's digital, like it's not a channel, right? It's more than that. It truly is the future. And it doesn't mean the death of anything, right? Just like ATMs didn't kill the branch or tellers, like digital doesn't mean branches go away. People want people when they want people, right? But they also don't want people unless they absolutely have to have them, right? Like it should be their choice as much as possible. And so when you do that and you recognize that and you value their time and their effort and their energy, that's how you make sure that you stay stable, especially when in the financial services industry, like that's where we're getting clobbered. That's where the chimes come out and have acquisitions at levels that we couldn't dream of, because they just do really well with that one piece. And so learn from it, execute on it, grow from it. And then if credit unions stay in a legacy thinking mindset without looking back at the things that don't work anymore and getting rid of the sacred cows that have existed forever. Like, well, yeah, but 3 CEOs ago, like they created that. It was like new and amazing and like cool. And now it's done and it's not useful anymore. Let's get rid of it because it's just taking up space. Because cognitive load is real. It's real, right? We give so many choices. Like if you have 17 checking accounts, like you're doing it wrong, right? Like that's too many for people to try to figure out. But anyway, we've got to get to a spot where we're serving people in a way that they want to be served. We want to respect the channel that they want to use. We want to respect their time and their energy and their effort, and know that people don't wake up wanting to do banking. They don't go to bed wanting to do banking. They more worry about it than anything else and don't know where to go. And if you're my son, you're looking at Reddit to get information on finances, and that terrifies me.
Crazy.
And I need to figure out a solution that's not that for his car, for anything. It's always Reddit. That's the source of truth for him for some reason. And it's just, we've got to make a difference in how we're approaching this, and we need to do it quickly. And there are a handful of credit unions that have started to execute on that really well, and there are a handful that are looking at it, or maybe a couple dozen. But the vast majority of credit unions are still moving too slow on something that is absolutely imperative to our success as an industry. And this industry only works if the majority of us are successful, right? Or the whole idea of credit unions becomes, we rise together, we die together, right? Kind of thing. Like, as much as we all want to think that we're unique and special and different, I'm definitely no exception to that. We're like, yeah, but my credit union is better than any other credit union because I happen to work there. And that's been true at every credit union I've worked at, and it's changed multiple times in my career. And every single time, going to now is the best one, right? That's that tribalism thing. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, what people perceive of credit union is what they perceive of the credit union that's near them. And if that one is not doing well too, then like that just, there's no way to show that we're a relevant provider of services in a way that people will want to consume. And that could be the end, right? We could be Blockbuster.
That's a scary thought, huh? I mean, it is really crazy to see how many, I've referenced this a few times, so, sorry for folks that listen to every episode if there actually is anybody that does that. But, there are so many people getting financial advice from TikTok and Reddit. Have you ever looked at some of the advice that's out there, Zach? It is terrifying. I mean, terrifying. But the problem is, if you say anything with enough conviction, people will believe you, right? You see some 19-year-old kid on TikTok with a Lamborghini behind him, and he's telling you how his financial strategy helped him take $5 to turn it into that in 3 months, and all you need to do is do what he does. Like, yeah, if you're a 19-year-old kid, that sounds super attractive. Like, why would I go schlepping to McDonald's flipping burgers for, minimum wage when I can just do what this guy says and I'm gonna have a Lamborghini in 3 months? Like, great, I'm in. And in all reality, like they're absolutely setting themselves backwards significantly by taking on this advice, but it's said so confidently. And I think there's just so much opportunity for credit unions to step into that space in a lot of where, the acceleration of reach is in digital.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we as an industry have wanted to, have talked about how imperative financial education is to us, and it's what we are committed to and drive toward, and yet look at the trajectory of people's confidence in their level of financial knowledge. It hasn't moved a whole lot. So, and that isn't to say that they don't want to learn more. They do, but the methods we've tried haven't worked. So we need to stop putting out blog posts that nobody looks at, and we need to go where they are and meet them there and serve them there, and then provide them resources once we've got them interested and shown that there's valid, good information out there. But if it's going to be reading a 7-paragraph article, you better TLDR that thing.
I was just at the Financial Brand Forum in Vegas the other week, Zach, and I got ambushed by Jim Marous from the Financial Brand, and he asked me 2 questions that I really liked. And shout out to Jim. Jim, I'm giving you credit, but I'm stealing your idea. I'd like to ask Zach these 2 questions because I'm curious what Zach's thoughts are. And the 2 questions that he asked were just, what do you think is the greatest opportunity, and what do you think is the greatest challenge facing community FIs, and specifically for you credit unions right now?
The greatest opportunity is to tell our story more. People care about what we do and why we do it. If we would just let them know, like, why are we keeping that such a secret? I don't understand. And it was the biggest threat, complacency. And it's not competition. It's not the biggest threat. Like, yes, competition is a threat, but only if we're not doing our job, right? If we're complacent and we're something that killed me was a few years ago now. There was this big uprising from credit unions that the government wanted to have the post office start doing check cashing and some actual banking services to serve the underserved. Credit unions are like, yo, that's what credit unions are for. Like, if that's what you were for and that's what you were doing, they wouldn't be looking for a new solution. You know what I'm saying?
Ouch.
Zach
dropping the truth bomb.
Well, that was why I never saw fintechs as competition. Like, if they're coming in and doing something and we're like, but that was our job. Like, well, then you're not doing it. Like, if somebody can come eat your lunch, then you weren't protecting it or taking care of what you should have been. And so wake up, stop being complacent, realize that there's free people out there, and you can't just wake up, turn on the lights and unlock the door and the business is going to keep coming. Like, you have to earn it. You've got to earn this stuff all the time. That changed years ago. And the problem is that the balance sheets haven't reflected the impact that's coming. And it's that, that's what's scary, is that if you're still making money, you feel like you're okay. And again, Blockbuster was making money and making fun of Netflix at one point, right? And then it's not an exception. It's just a big one that everybody can recognize. But there's a lot of that's happened, and we will be one of those in the future if we don't. And that is community banks and it's credit unions. And if community banks tell your story, do the things you do, and the hard part there is you can have you have paid boards that can be bought out, and you don't have a vote. Like, a credit union can't merge to our credit union without the credit union members saying we want to do it. And if they're engaged enough to care and they vote, they can potentially shut that down. It happened recently that one merger that had gone all the way through and been approved and blessed didn't pass through the members, and so it's dead in the water, right? Not a bank, you can't do that. But if you keep telling that story, people are going to, not want you to go away, not want you to get, consumed by a super regional or the Big Four or whatever. And community financial institutions are the ones who can make all the difference. And it's tell the story, let people understand why you're there, and then recognize that you need to grow, change, and adapt to where the world is now and what people want now, and not just do what you've always done because you're still making money the other day.
Dude, if I could just cut out that last like 2 minutes and drop it on every CEO of every credit union's desk in the country, I feel like we'd all be a lot better for it. I mean, look, you're getting feisty, so I'm willing to get a little feisty with you. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that was really cool of you to say, Zach. I think, there's competition everywhere, right? And if you're not prepared to meet the needs of consumers, they're going to look for it, right? And so our job is to maintain relevance by providing the services that they need. And I think to your point, like credit unions have a really great story, right? We have a lot of the things that people are looking for. And so I think a lot of times the challenge that sometimes, our credit unions face is that they see that these fintechs are starting up and they're like, well, we've been doing that. We offered that. And you're saying, well, yeah, but obviously you didn't do it well enough or whatever because it didn't get out. But to your point, I think a lot of it is literally just getting awareness. I think that's one of the biggest problems that this industry has is just a lack of awareness. And, like I said, you're willing to get a little feisty, so I'm willing to get a little feisty. I think one thing that a lot of people are just not willing to admit is coming is we are entering the single largest wealth transfer in human history. Look at your membership base. Look at where the primary amount of revenue you generate off of which accounts. Look at your primary deposits and look at their ages. I'm not saying look at your average membership age because a lot of credit unions are starting to be like, hey, you know what? I'm feeling pretty good. Like our average membership age is maybe a little bit lower than the industry average. Okay, great. I would love to say that this is correlation and causation, but validate this for me. But go make sure that when all of a sudden that aging out membership base, like I'm sorry to say it's dark, but they're going to pass away. It's going to happen. This is life. We all end at some point. When that ends for them, where does that business go? And what does that do to your business? And I think you're right, Zach. In the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to get hit with some gut punches where people are like, but we were fine. What happened?
Yeah, you stop paying attention. No, but then look at where the money's going to go, and then take financial services off the board and ask what the younger generations care about right now. Who do they want to do business with in anything, whether it's food or cars or any business? It's purpose-driven, community-focused. Like that's where they want to do business. And so if we could just tell the story, like it's been a punchline kind of like in a ha people are silly kind of way for a long time to go like our members still don't know we do mortgages like 10 years ago. Okay. I mean, you're saying the quiet part out loud right there. Like you don't know how to tell a story. Like if they don't know what you're doing, that's on you. And that goes to the, marketing is important. It's not some nice to have, whatever it is, marketing department, put resources there, put money there, tell stories. Storytelling is so important because that's how the message gets through, right? We are tribal people. We want to be part of a community. That's how we're wired for survival and everything else. So we want to hear the stories because the stories tell us the things that you're doing more than you tell it, like 75,000 hours in the community. I don't care. Tell me a story. Like that's a number. I don't know what that means, right? You walked in a parade, sweet. What difference are you making and how? Tell me the story and drill it down to one person, because one person who looks somewhat like me is going to resonate 1,000 times more than these big numbers you want to throw out there, right? Like tell the stories so that people can understand what you do and why you do it and why it's so important that you exist and what they'll lose if you're not there anymore.
One of my favorite, as a marketer, like I love to watch commercials. Like I love to look at ads. I love to see what people are doing. And, one of them that really struck me a while ago was a tech company that was doing online fitness subscriptions to help people figure out how to use, everyday objects in their house to do workouts at home. And it's just this completely silent, no words are spoken commercial. And it's this guy in probably his late 70s, not in good shape. You can tell he's struggling to get out of the chair. And he goes into his garage and he just picks up some heavy object. And he's like trying to pick it up. He can't really pick it up. And then it shows the evolution of this, and he's getting it picked up higher and higher. And this is the only thing he ever does. And finally he gets up to here. And then the tone of the commercial changes, and he's smiling and he's happy and he's picking it up. He's picking it up with enthusiasm. And the commercial ends, and it's him at his kid's house for Christmas, and he picks up his granddaughter to hold her up to put the star on top of the Christmas tree. I'm in tears, Zach. Like, I'm just like bawling. I'm like, now that is a commercial. I'm like, now that inspires me. And the reason I bring that up is you could probably just go into your member services center and throw a rock in any direction and hit 10 stories like that, right? Tell one of them. Tell one of them. Show your community that you just helped a member hold their kid up, their grandkid up to put a star on top of the Christmas tree. Like, that is showing me, okay, that's why I want to do business with you. That's the impact you're going to have for me, right? So I think there's so much opportunity in the cool stories that credit unions have. Anyway, I don't know how we got down that, but
We get all kinds of fights getting worked up, right?
Yeah.
So then, the soapboxes come out. That's what happens. But like that to me, like the lack of awareness around that I experience, and it's all anecdotal, folks. I don't have any data to back that up, right? But what I've seen in the conversations that I've had, there's a lack of awareness at the upper management level in credit unions consistently with how they support their marketing teams, the vision that they give them, the freedom that they give them to tell a story, the fact that they task them with telling a story in the first place, right? It feels like a cost center more often than not. And if that's the case, then we can't sit back in 10, 15 years when we're no longer at credit union industry, we're finding other jobs and wonder why it happened. Like we should know.
that's super powerful words. What do you I have to try and find the way, but I think it's pretty obvious, thinking science fiction and crazy future. Like, what do you think the future holds? Like, and I'd love to use kind of so what if we don't? Like, what if we don't do anything? What do you think it looks like? But what do you think it looks like if we do something, man?
Let me start negative, because why not be cynical to kind of start things off so I can kind of end on a more positive note maybe, right? But if we don't, then credit unions are another cute story that you can tell, like the milkman and everything else, of like those things we used to have and they were kind of cool. Becomes an old story, a look back topic of a movie for a feel good kind of old Americana vibe, right? Like that's the future. The future is big banks, ultra sized credit unions that act like banks, and a constant political battle over taxation. That is what the narrative and the story gets to be told, right? But if we get it right, if we start to realize and start to really just lean into those places that are going to make the difference, then the story becomes how credit unions saved the entire middle class, right? And made a difference and kept the big banks and the big corporations in check, right? Like we gave them an alternative that made them feel good and they were a part of, right? Like the credit unions in a day, we're a cooperative, like a farmer's market or anything else. Like we are a group of people that come together, put all their money together to help other people. And when you realize that and you know that, like the impact of that is huge. It becomes a modern day It's a Wonderful Life, right? Which is basically like every credit union story, right? Just people coming together to help each other. And when you do that, you see the good you can make in your own neighborhoods, the good you can make in your own community, and the importance that connections can have.
That's super cool. I want to end with that because I love that. Zach, I really appreciate the time, but before I let you go, I have two final questions for you. Okay. So one, where do you go to stay up to date on what's happening in the industry? What kind of stuff do you follow?
Follow the Banking on Digital Growth podcast, James Robert Lay. I like to watch what that man does. I like to talk to him occasionally when I get the chance and learn a lot from him. Speaking, Jim Maroos, Banking Transformed, I believe is that podcast, right? That's where I first heard about Debbie, and we actually just had a press release come out that we signed with Debbie. So you just never know where you're going to pick up a good nugget, right? I love Jim Maroos, Ron Shevlin, team over at Gonzo Bankers, Payments.com, Financial Brand, usual suspects. I hit Google sometimes, but then when I was looking for new technology, I talked to my fintech partners, everybody else, like who do you like? Who do you respect? Who treats you well? So I just try to use my network, connect with as many people as possible, hit FinTech meetup, some of those large conferences where you can meet a lot of different people from different industries and just kind of see what's out there, right?
That's awesome. Yeah, I like it's a very much an ecosystem play, right? Like talking to friends is a huge one. Well, if people want to make friends with you, if they want to connect with you, or if they want to learn more about ELGA and what you're doing there with the credit union, how do they do that, Zach?
Yeah, I'm not huge on social media, but I am on LinkedIn. And then website is www.elgacu.com. That's where you can learn about what ELGA is doing and kind of what's next. We are a positive work in progress. We've done some amazing things, and we are doing cooler things as we go. But yeah, you can hit me up on LinkedIn. Love to talk. If you want to sell me something, you can send a message in there, and I might ignore it, but it's okay.
Yeah, no, don't. Zach and I were talking about this earlier. Please just spare all of us with your like completely uninformed cold outreach that has zero understanding of how you could potentially provide value. If I had $1, Zach, for how many people reach out to us through our website to sell us like window washing services, like I could be retired, man. I'm like, please just stop. So that is my just little like cold-hearted, it is what it is to all you wonderful salespeople out there. I love you to death, but just please be thoughtful. Zach, seriously, again, thank you so much for coming to be on a guest. It's an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Banking Podcast powered by Typhon. Find more episodes on digitalbankingpodcast.com or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.